Okay, getting to interview, Bryan.
Yes, sir.
A very, very open question. But when moving into a new field, many professionals experience a resounding silence on their first few applications.
Sure.
So what advice would you have? And this is a two-part question. What advice would you have for getting to the interview stage? And then as a follow-up, just so that you're thinking about this a little, is what advice would you have for when you get silence and handling what feels like rejection?
Definitely taking them backwards. It's not just you, is the advice in dealing with silence. I personally have dealt with similar silence recently. So it's not just you. Understanding that and doing everything you can to make sure you don't internalize it. It's very difficult. It is very natural to internalize it. But that's the most important thing. The lack of signal in today's employment marketplace is much more significant than it ever had been previously. I know many individuals who have been copied on introductions into an organization that's actively hiring, or and not had any response on those introductions from their previous founder or their leader that they knew was going to be able to help them unlock an interview or unlock an introduction. So it's all too common, and that's another story altogether. So it's not just you in the silence. In terms of getting the interview, how to get the interview, I do think that while I just acknowledged the lack of signal in today's marketplace, that it is still all about who you know, and being able to leverage your network, whether it's your network of previous coworkers and peers and leaders, or your network of local climate enthusiasts or activists, however it is that you're networking. It is all about who you know. Your propensity to gain that first interview step on a warm introduction is going to be much better than a cold application. If you're not able to develop a warm introduction, there are several ways you can attempt to warm up a cold application, and that too can be challenging, and you may fall victim to the lack of signal. And remember, again, it's not you. So you submit an application, custom tailor your cover letter. You spend some time doing all of those things. What do you do next? You find individuals on LinkedIn, probably the easiest source, and you reach out and you let them know, I have applied. And then it's very similar to your cover letter information about short, succinct, tailored. This is my fit for the role. You don't send an inappropriate volume of these. Again, it depends. How large is the company? Do you know that this is specifically the hiring manager, or do you assume that? Again, it depends on how many of those messages you're sending. But you send them pretty immediately, and then you need to be patient and give it probably a week. And that's probably the hardest part, is sitting back and being patient. What you don't want to do is send multiple messages over the course of subsequent days and be very noisy and pesky, because then you've created a negative first impression. But you do, I would advocate that you want to be persistent and politely, professionally persistent as you can be. And then ultimately, there's a time when you know when to say when, and invest your own time and your own emotional energy somewhere else, and index right back to it's not you if you're unsuccessful.
How would you guide someone to make that decision? At what point?
It depends. How factors that influence that, or how much your level of interest in the job, your perceived fit. You need to have an honest assessment of both of those things. I wouldn't send any singular human more than 3 at the absolute most messages that were unresponded. Probably only 2. I wouldn't send more than 2 messages in the course of a single week. It depends on when this first one is sent. If I send it on a Monday, do I follow up on Friday or do I wait till Monday? It depends. Circumstances are going to range pretty widely. Follow your instincts, trust your gut is interesting advice, especially for folks that may not have a ton of confidence and may have dealt with that lack of signal and dealt with that silence and are somewhat apprehensive and unsure of themselves. But
I like the rule of thumb there that you've got, particularly if you are a little bit anxious to be making progress, which is common for the people that I work with. The no more than 3, ideally 2, and certainly never more than twice in a week.
Yeah,
it's useful. Like, am I being needy? Well, wait a minute. Did I send 6 last week? Yes, you're being needy. Any more than 2, etc. So yeah, that's useful. That's useful.
And maybe in closing here, I do think it's okay to escalate. You start with a recruiter or an HR person, 2 messages in a week and no response. You find, who you believe to be either the hiring manager or perhaps the appropriate executive. If it's a technical role, you find a CTO. If it's a sales role, you find a CRO, revenue officer person, what have you. You find the appropriate executive. You need to customize your messages. Your message to the recruiter is probably longer and more detail oriented than your message to an executive, but you should have some level of understanding of kind of how to approach a varied audience. It's okay to escalate and attempt different individuals, but again, what I don't recommend is recruiter, manager, executive, CEO, everyone all on that first initial blast. That's probably a little bit too much. How can your network introduce you? Again, you may not know who you know, but this is back to some of the points we've talked about in terms of developing community. If you've gone through those trainings or you participated in those cohorts or you're volunteering locally, like who are you talking to in other settings of your life that may know individuals, and how comfortable are you sharing and being transparent and vulnerable? I'm really interested in this job and haven't heard anything yet. It's with this company. Who do you know? Do you happen to know anyone there? That's another way that you can hopefully make inroad. That's much more challenging in today's global remote or hybrid working environments, because you could be applying for jobs that are based in other continents and in far-flung cities. But it's a tactic and something that you should explore, because it is all about who you know, in my opinion, and the world's a much smaller place than we believe to be sometimes.
Yes, and